Welcome to Concerning the Spiritual in Art, a podcast exploring spirituality, consciousness, and the creative process. I'm your host, Martin Benson. All right, y'all, welcome back to the podcast. I have an incredibly special episode for you today with visual artist Emily Cheng. Emily is based in New York City and does the most incredible, powerful paintings and drawings related to her own personal spiritual explorations and the questions and insights and ideas that she has sort of being codified and expressed and explored through her art practice. And today we had just an amazing, authentic exchange and really dove deep into all things sort of spiritual practice, things related to the actual role of the artist and how we can cultivate more of a sense of open curiosity and how important that is for the not only development of our work, but also the development of our own consciousness. We talked a lot about her spiritual interest and sort of her origins and how she's sort of began exploring spirituality in a more conscious way through her art making. And it just went to so many incredibly deep places, especially we talked a lot about philosophy. We talked about the Tao. We talked about Buddhism. We talked about contemporary culture. We talked about all the things that relate to sort of the paradigm of this 21st century and how we can traverse this landscape to expand our consciousness, grow our hearts, and be able to create the kind of artwork and the kind of world that we want to see. And so it's just really special. You're going to love it. And so here you go. Here's Emily Cheng. Hey, y'all, I'm going to cut in here real quick for all my YouTube viewers out there, just to remind you that the podcast also exists on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and any major podcast platform. So if you're enjoying what you're seeing here on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe on one of those platforms as well, so you can take the show with you on the go and never really miss an episode. Also, I wanted to let you know that I'm now offering subscriptions on my Instagram page at Martin L. Benson for 99 cents a month. That's less than $12 a year, which that funding will go toward helping produce the show. So I can continue to evolve the podcast, continue to create great content. So if you support what I'm doing here and are enjoying all this content here on YouTube, consider not only subscribing on the podcast platforms, but also subscribing on Instagram for that 99 cents a month so that I can continue on this path. So thank you all. Now back to the show. Peace. All right, Emily, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited to connect with you. Shout out to Barbara, who connected us, Barbara Broughton, who connected me to your work a while ago. And I'm so glad I finally able to get you on the podcast. And I just absolutely love the quality of the work that's coming out of your studio. It has such a freshness and uniqueness. And there's so many like components, like especially when I think about like duality, like you're really playing with order and chaos, delicacy, transparency, with flatness and space and depth. There's just so much happening with not only like the quality of the materials and how you're handling them, but then the imagery themselves feel highly personal, but yet still related to the universal. There's lots of interesting, like pointing to geometry, sacred geometry happening there, but also like organic energy of the earth that I feel like coming through the work. So there's just so many wonderful things happening in your artwork that really just draws me deeply into it. And I think a good way for us to maybe begin our dialogue today is to begin kind of discussing maybe the origins of when your sort of spiritual consciousness, your spirituality, you started to filter into your artwork in a more conscious way, where you really owned it and you felt like this is who I am, what I'm doing, and what I want to express, and really diving deep in there. Like, when did that happen for you, and what was that process like?
It happened. Well, first, you mentioned duality, and that was like the first theme of when I got out of school, and I sort of left a kind of abstraction that was related to a still life, but not a still life. But I had this impulse to work with the concept of duality. So that was, when I was very young, and I didn't really think of it as spiritual. I thought of it as just something I was grappling with in my life. it permutated to many other things. I got very involved with trying to make a bridge between the Renaissance and my contemporary life. And
Mm.
at that time, it was kind of minimalism. So can you imagine, right? That's a very it's a very difficult thing to bridge. But and I think in the 90s when I was really also grappling with the duality of East and West in terms of what it meant to be a brought up Chinese living in America. So there was, a kind of dialogue I was trying to get to of my heritage, my ethnic heritage, and one that I was brought up in, which was contemporary Western art and philosophy and thought. And I wasn't even thinking of the word spiritual, which at that time had terrible connotations.
Hmm.
But Martin, you're a bit younger than me, so you would be very lucky to be brought up in an era where, the black cast that it had was just going out of style.
Yeah.
But when I had to kind of um, deal with that whole, notion of it being very uncool.
Mm.
And and I remember at one time in my studio, I thought, well, I could try to catch the market, or I can just make paintings that I really love. And then, I looked at the two possibilities and what they offered. And catching the market, if you do it and you do catch the market, which a lot of people do, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, then you become, rich and famous and everything else that all the glories that, you might imagine. But if you don't, um, you would have a room full of paintings that you still were in love with. And if you do catch the market, at the end of the day, you might really be fed up and think, oh my God, I'm such a phony. I've been doing the same work for 30 years and it's making me sick. And I did it because I was just chasing something that wasn't really me.
Mm.
So so I made that decision, and it felt like the right decision, but it wasn't always the easiest one,
Yeah.
because it meant that a lot of times I didn't know what I was doing, and I was just kind of sort of intuiting my way through it. And then I was also brought up in a time where you didn't have to have a reason for why you did everything. Today you have to have a reason,
Yeah.
and that was I have found that I have um I have followed questions and obsessions without really having a whole pat answer for it.
Hmm.
In the following year or decade or somewhere in between, I have found the best reason forever, you
Oh.
know, to do these things. And it has given me such confidence that I just say, okay, this is it. I'm not going to question anymore.
Hmm.
I'm I'm done with that questioning every little thing that creates doubt and misery. You
Mm.
know, I think as artists, we all have a certain amount of doubt, and
Hmm.
that just comes with the job description, and there's nothing you can do.
It does. It really does.
You want to be an
Uh,
artist? Good luck. Doubt.
yeah, exactly. No, it is a really challenging path for many, many reasons. And some that you like illustrated around like even just the viability of like your own sustaining practice, like to be able to sustain your life as an artist, like there are going to be choice points where you have to make certain decisions around the market, marketability, following trends and like trying to fit in there so that you can find your slice of success, or like diving into the other direction, which is kind of like going full tilt into what it is you ultimately deeply care about making, regardless of if it gets noticed or seen, bought, or sold. And I think many artists come to that kind of fork in the road. And I think what
Hmm.
you're expressing is highly relatable to so many out there who are probably listening. And I think you are right. We are pretty fortunate in these times that, like, the word spiritual itself, people don't have an allergy to it in the way they used to.
Hmm.
It used to automatically just black box you. You know what I mean? Like, if you're using that word consciously,
Hmm.
in those art markets and those in that kind of world, but now people are more open than ever. And I'm
You know,
hell grateful for it, but it's still
yeah.
the same challenges still exist, I feel.
I see. The other thing that I didn't mention is that if you don't catch the market, you have a whole studio full of paintings you absolutely hate. That is a terror.
Yes, but when you have something you feel deeply is authentic and connected to your own progression as a human, like, it's like almost like these little, almost like signposts along the way of your own evolution. Like, each painting is sort of revealing to you another layer of your development, your consciousness, your sense of care and commitment towards something that really has no survival usage for us, right? Like, painting
Mhm,
itself on a practical level is such a magical thing to me because we don't have to paint in order to survive. You know what I
mhm,
mean? In the most, like, essential way. So to
mhm,
me, it's a mark of something truly spectacular about the human consciousness and human existence is our drive to express, our drive to share, to relate and connect with one another through the medium of creativity and art itself. And so there's something deeply special there, but it can always be hijacked as well. So it's like, I feel like, we're always, at least I'll speak for myself, always in this battleground of, like, maintaining the alignment with the vision for the larger path instead of being distracted by the vision for the shorter path, meaning, like, trying to find the quick route to success. But it's part of the
mhm,
it's part of the
mhm.
journey.
Yeah. Well, for me, the urge comes from my curiosity about the world and
Mhm.
beyond, life.
Yes.
itself. So I think that if you're focused on your career, if you're focused on feeding your family, well, that's a worthy thing to do. But it's for me, it's like, how do I explore all the curiosities that I have?
Yes,
um and make a life as an artist, because you want that life to exist until you die. You
definitely.
don't retire from your curiosities.
No.
So you
Mm-mm.
should not retire from your life as an artist if it's driven by the right engine.
Yes,
you know
exactly. I always look at it as like a life path, and I
Mm,
recognize that for myself in my very early 20s. I'm now coming closer to 40 and, like, looking back, and I remember that point where I just knew, like, this was going to be my teacher, this path as an artist. This journey is going to help me grow my consciousness, my spiritual heart through whatever highs or lows it's going to take me on. Like, I just surrendered and devoted myself to this path of using art
mm,
as a vehicle for my own inner transformation. And in the most ideal sense, I feel when the inner transformation occurs, the outer transformation follows. And so that's been my deep drive, but it's still a lot of hurdles you got to go through. But I think what you're pointing to, this innate curiosity and being deeply connected with this sense of wonder and awe and wanting to know, like, this feeling like
right.
we
So
want to know.
there's two levels. There's the curiosity about um the world, and how the history, the ideas that keep repeating itself in every decade or century, and how we might make the connection going back for millennia, and whether those little signposts were there 5 millennia ago. These kinds are 10 millennia ago. There's those kinds of curiosities. And then there's the curiosity about yourself as a person, which I think the daunting thing about being an artist is that your painting reveals so much about who you are.
Hmm.
And uh, I used to teach art and painting, and you can always see when a person hits a wall and they chicken out and then the painting makes a turn, you know. And I used to go into people's studio and say like, so here's where you got to the tough part and made a turn, and they were like, how did you know? But um, but I think the amazing thing about painting and learning how to read painting is that it is so reflective of how your mind works, how you
Hmm.
do problems, who you are, and we're not all the imaginative. They have this like stereotype of an artist, right? And it's somebody who's like goes into a terrible, sweat and a fervor, and then the studio is a complete mess, and they're walking through piles of paper to get to someplace, and they may wake up in the middle of the night and and light a cigarette, go into the studio, or they drinking coffee all day, and that's just one type of artist.
Hmm. Hmm.
And certainly Agnes Martin might be the exact opposite,
Exactly. It's such a good reference. Oh, yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
And
Yeah.
we are left trying to find our place somewhere in between.
Hmm.
And so the models, if we don't conform to the first stereotype, we might think when we're young, like, oh, I'm not truly an artist. My studio is so neat, which is what was with me. But we just all have to find what we uniquely have to offer the visual world and the
Yeah.
world, because I don't think I separate the visual world from the world. Uh,
Hmm.
and um, you know, I think that because I place such a value on my curiosity, I also think that um it will lead me to such interesting places that isn't just about art, but about guiding people to be open in general,
Hmm.
guiding people to feel their bodies, or to feel what it might be like in an afterlife, whether there is an afterlife, to all kinds of things. What does an unfurling heart look like, or
Yeah.
can maybe feel like, that kind of thing. Um, yeah, so
Yeah. I mean, I
so
think what you're pointing to about like the stereotypes or these like archetypes of the artist, and like how, especially in the West, we've like
Mhm.
seen the artist as this kind of crazed madman who's, like you said, working all hours of the day, has a flash of inspiration, and then like, just goes to town on the canvas, and you know what I mean, and then walks away in a fervor, who's, troubled mentally and has trouble in their life. Like, yeah, we see that archetype, but like, you're so right, there's so many different ways to approach art making. And that's like, like for me, like I work very clean these days. I used to be a lot messier. And for me, the reason I work much more clean is because I treat it as a ritual, as like a ceremony, as like a
Mm,
container for like trying to open up my heart more. And so I
mhm,
find that when I'm more conscious of the way I handle the cleaning of my brushes, the cleaning of the palette, the organization of the space, the setting the tone for the space, like the more I'm able to like let go a little bit of a certain part of myself, and the more I'm able to open to like a deeper dimension. So I find
mm.
that like that ritual, that sense of the studio itself being kind of for me a sacred space. And so I in any sacred space, you want to sweep the floor, you want to make sure you dust things and make sure, you know what I mean, there's a great level of care brought to not just the art but everything that surrounds it. Would you say that you
Yeah, it's
feel
also about emptying
similarly?
the mind.
Say that
Yeah,
again.
absolutely. It's also about emptying the mind.
Hmm.
You're coming to the painting. You might have an idea about what you want to put into your painting, but you don't want to put everything plus that thing in your painting. You want to just put the thing in the painting, right? So so then that clearing, it's clearing away. It's sort of like a runway, you
Mm,
know, and then like, can you imagine if a plane was on the runway and there were like 14 different kinds of vehicles and this and that? No, it's like a nightmare.
yeah.
Plane on the runway and clean
Yeah.
the
Yes,
runway.
I love that. That's a great sort of way of thinking about it, like
Mhm.
emptying the mind, creating that space for this magical experience to come forward. I feel like the creative act, sometimes like you have to show up and you have to just like do the work. You just have to show up to the studio and get going so that the muse or that divine sort of creative impulse can find a moment to move through you, a flash of inspiration. Sometimes that happens like immediately. Sometimes it happens just like effortlessly. And sometimes you just have to like you have to be
Sweat.
disciplined. Yeah, you have to
Mhm.
be disciplined with your ritual and show up and give it space to arrive and not try to like force it out.
Mhm.
But I feel like I struggle with that because like you want to feel like productive in the studio, but sometimes I have to let go and be like, being productive in the studio today means doing nothing but just sitting in the studio and just
Yeah, it's
be holding
terrible
space.
time. Yeah, I know. It's like, I'm always a much better partner when I just begin a painting and I have them filled with optimism and creativity. And I am just hard to live with. I'm hard to live with myself when I, the like 3 days starting a painting, because that's when I'm sweating and doubting and walking in circles and scratching my head and it's and trying to be open
Yeah.
for all the things that are coming in, and
Hmm.
sometimes and then you realize, I don't know why you always have to go through this dip, but you kind of have to always go through the dip before you get, go up. But once you start going up, you look back and you're like, you laugh at yourself. Like, I went through this ridiculous dip. Why?
Yes.
Dude, I torture myself all the time. Why?
I know. It is crazy, like what the expectations and the judgments that we have within our own inner dialogue. And
Mhm.
and those dips, I love how you're expressing it because I totally feel that. I feel like some of like my favorite paintings that I've ever made are ones that like didn't come effortlessly. Like I had to like give them space. I had to have a sense of sensitivity and patience to allow the right inspiration to come through. And there is that feeling of the dip. Sometimes I look at it like a slingshot. Like sometimes you got to be pulled down and back in order to go forward and up. You know what I mean? Like in terms of an exchange of
Mhm.
energy.
Mhm.
So sometimes like I look at that dip in
Mhm.
the studio, I try to remind myself like, yeah, it's you're having your struggle with this, these couple works of art, these pieces, but just stay the course, trust the process, inspiration will come. You're being pulled back to be shot forward, you know,
And is
into
that
it.
is that in with it, is that after you start a painting or is it between paintings?
Both. Sometimes it's between like bodies
Uh,
of work, like I feel like right now, do you ever get that feeling
uh-huh,
like you're in
uh-huh,
between the bodies of work? You're
yeah.
in that liminal space where like you feel like the body
Mhm.
of paintings and drawings and work you've been doing have really found their full expression. And now they feel like you want to let go of them and create space for like a new iteration, a new evolution. That liminal space can be so challenging because like you holding this expectation, of the creative output that you
Mhm.
just had for the past 3 or 4 years exploring these ideas. And now it's like
Mhm.
you're in this softer, more open space that can be very daunting and scary. But I think, I've
But
been
it's
through,
a reorientation,
say that one more time.
right? It's a reorientation, a
Yes.
reorientation. So, so in a reorientation, you kind of let what was your past or the body of work you just finished doing, you kind of like let it come down. And then before you find the space to begin, you have to kind of reorient yourself. How do I feel
Hmm.
about this? I still feel that is important. And what other things do I think are important now?
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
looking into your work more specifically, I spoke out about in the very beginning is like your ability to like put these different sort of like dualistic frameworks against each other in such a beautiful, like kind of harmonious way. And a lot of your images, they're all very fresh and unique. There are certain motifs that get repeated subtly here and there, but each one feels so fresh into itself. And there's this exploration of like a sense of transcendental space through your use of like color, or even like your use of
Mm.
like transparency sometimes, like in the, especially in like the backgrounds, like creating this kind of like spaciousness around some of the elements within the painting themselves. And then you also have like some distinct geometries in there, some more like playful organic geometry as well. Like I see, like in one of your paintings, I can see like the Kabbalah tree of life kind of being expressed in some ways, or I see like a
Mhm.
sense of like the Venus, like a Venus star like pattern that you're doing on another one, a constellation kind of looking element. Then there's like a sense of like a serpent or an earthly like kind of snake or animal or creature of some kind. Like you're really bringing a lot of like these earthly elements and symbols and together with this feeling of like this transcendent space. And I think you couple those things so well. I'm curious about like when you begin your paintings, like we've kind of talked about, like you really don't, do you have like a, do you do sketches before, like kind of like work out some ideas before you tackle like a larger piece? Because a lot of your paintings are larger in scale. So I'm just curious about like practically like your process for approaching some of the imagery that you're making.
Yeah, I do ink on paper, very small, just to kind of play with images. And then when I realize an image is worthy of making it big, I do that. But it's a collection of things that I'm interested in. I have tended to make paintings or let's start out with drawing. I tend to make drawings of things that I don't understand and that I really want to know more about.
Hmm.
And then I turn them into paintings, um, and oftentimes it's just a way of exploring a concept or an
Mhm.
idea. It's what is this shape from? Where is it? What is it? What is it really?
Yeah.
You can say that, oh, symbolically it means this and blah, blah, blah. But like, what does, it had an origin. And
Hmm.
maybe it's not even the origin that everybody talks about. Maybe it has an origin before the origin, so,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
so, and, yeah, so I have to explore those things myself. But the other thing is that, I think that I was a born Taoist. It's nothing my parents would ever, nod their heads at because they didn't think this way. But I have spent the better part of my adult life bridging things,
Hmm.
being the bridge, and it's just a way of, even in my building that I live in. I live on the third floor of a six-floor building. And prior to this period, the last period where there were a lot of warring floors, people did that in the 80s and 90s. It's I would always be the one in the middle pulling the floors together.
Oh,
So,
wow.
it's and in an argument, I always see both people's points of view. And when Trump ran for office, I made myself a promise that I would not speak to somebody because of who they voted for.
Hmm.
Rather, I was interested in hearing what was their reasoning,
Beautiful.
how, what were they thinking about? And so now, what I see around me is so much division.
Hmm.
And I see that in my life, I have always tried to create, and I wouldn't even say harmonies because I think harmony is a kind of overused word, but I've always tried to create dialogues
Hmm.
among disparities, and I still think that the geometry, kind of playing with the more what you like to call organic, or you didn't say the word organic, but I think you earthy,
Yeah.
the earthly aspects are have to do with the systems that we don't understand, the greater systems, but also the rational versus the irrational,
Mm-hmm.
the logic, and the logic is like our minds trying to grapple with something that may or may not be logical.
Mm-hmm.
There's no one logic to anything. And we think like, oh, we understand, we have so much analysis today, you know
Mm-hmm.
like it's like you could drown in analysis.
Definitely.
Yeah, and
They
people do,
do.
and they lose their sense of listening to themselves and finding out what's right for them. And also what, they think that it has to be airtight conceptually. It's not it's not a thesis paper. As long as the best, the most solid fact in the world is when you know. Okay?
Yes.
If you know and you can build up an argument, you don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
You're just building an argument because you
Yeah.
know parameters, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
there's different levels of knowing. I love how you pointed to your heart for the
mhm.
latter, you know what I mean? In terms of like
It's your
to
body.
know, yes, to know something with every like layer of your being, not just intellectually, not just, from the rational, logical components of the mind, but from the totality of being. Of it's like in every
Mhm,
cell in your body kind of knowing. And I think everybody's experienced that on some level in their life. But a lot of us, because like you're saying, especially in these times, we are oversaturated with data, you know what I mean? And
mhm,
analysis
mhm,
of every little component of our existence. And we're divorcing ourselves from a sense of like bodily knowing and a
mhm,
sense of like being that is grounded in the actual here and now. Where
mhm,
and we're all victims of the projections and the ruminations, but really it's that still point between those extremes where all things meet. And I
mhm,
think in a way, I feel everybody is seeking that point, but we're misguided because of culture, because of conditioning, because of expectations, because of external pressures in our lives. And so we think we're finding that point, but we're actually divorced from like this dualistic framework of mind body, right? Like, and the still point between the two, where they all connect. And I feel like that's what I'm always
mhm,
seeking is like that point of connection. Like you spoke about being a bridge. I feel very like similarly in my life, like in terms of I look at my way of living in this world, I'm always trying to like be in the middle and try to help, both see both
mhm,
sides, like what you're saying, like trying to not be attached to one way of knowing or being, because the more we live, the more we recognize the paradox of all of this. And you spoke about like Taoism
mhm.
and like you being born a Taoist. Like I read the Tao Te Ching often. I just flip it, open it, because it is a paradox. The whole teaching is a
Right.
paradox. It's supposed to break the
Yes.
mind. It's supposed to break the
Mm,
rational logical frameworks that we've been so attached to see beyond. And I think that's why it's one of the
mm,
greatest works of art ever created, and its
mhm,
origins are very
mhm,
mysterious,
mhm.
in terms of but that knowledge is primordial, I feel like. And I
Yeah.
think artists are
Mhm,
tapping into that primordial space too, in
mhm,
certain ways, certain artists at certain times or in certain moments. And I think that's what I'm aiming for, albeit very imperfectly. But there are those moments where you do feel it for even just a glimpse. And I think that little taste, that little glimmer of experience is worth the entire journey because it's so far
mhm,
beyond what we could ever imagine in terms of like you said, the origins of the origin of these images or symbols or ideas. Like if we keep going back, like where does all of this mythology come from? Where do these archetypes
Mhm.
come from? Where do these stories come from? These symbols come from? Yeah, maybe we can point to a culture 5,000 years ago or 7,000 years ago that was using them. Maybe we can see it beyond that too. But then what was in front of that, you know? And I don't know if we'll
Mhm.
ever find that, but that deep curiosity to not be so attached to like a finite sense of what things are
Mhm.
makes, in my mind, makes you an artist in some way because you're open to new possibilities.
Well, we have an amazing life in the sense that we get to ponder. I think that most people, they don't have the time to ponder anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
and pondering is such a, it's really a luxury. And
Mm.
um, I've been going through this thing of trying to find out how addicted I am to my devices.
Mm.
And I know, right? To be very sober about my addiction. Uh, and um, and there are days that I say, yes, I am definitely addicted. And I feel the pleasure and I feel the draw and I feel the obsession. And then there's other times when I can disengage and I'm like, wow, I had a wonderful time with a really clear mind and I want to keep going there.
Mm.
So I go back and forth and it can be in a matter of 2 days. I can circle around, various things, and I look around and I wonder about everybody else and whether they are as um, cogent about their addictions. People that I look at in the subway, or we're walking down. I'm in New York, right? So I'm walking down the street, and it's like 4 out of 5 people are looking down on their phones. It's terrifying, and sometimes
Yes.
it's even me. It's even me, and
Mm-hmm.
um, and then I was like, okay, wow, look at that architecture. It's like sometimes I'm just so enamored with everything that I see around me that I'm so happy to be off my,
Yes.
device. And it's a real, you know, uh, something that I really make a concerted effort to do. Hmm.
Yes. I mean, it's such a battle for all of us. Like if you're living in this 21st century if you're living in kind of like a more, I guess, industrial, like especially Western society, um, like in terms of like culture, with the iPhones, with the social media, with all of the oversaturation of information, and
Hmm.
stimulation,
Hmm.
it's so numbing. Like everybody is dealing with this problem and it's come on
Hmm.
so fast, like
Hmm.
relative to any other kind of technological breakthrough. Like the speed in which this has come and is continuing to evolve is very scary, but I think it calls upon us to make real concerted efforts to not only a recognize the problem, which is what you're speaking about, like first recognizing the addiction, being conscious of it, and then b developing the
Right,
tools, the skills necessary to be able to pull yourself out of the sludge of the scroll, where you're just
right,
constantly mindlessly absorbing images and information at a rate you can't even comprehend, and it's
right.
addicting. And I think,
Yes.
that's why the analog and the art, like, that's why I've been so drawn to painting and drawing. That's why I'm even more drawn to like looking at paintings and drawings and sculptures and real physical materials, than ever
Hmm.
before,
Hmm.
because I feel like it's healing and counterbalancing the hyper digital reality that we're immersed in.
I mean, there was a time when the digital aspect of exhibitions were coming into the museum space or the gallery space, and I was filled with horror. It's there just as much, if not more, and some people, officials will tell you, well, that's the way we're trying to get students who are, digital to get involved with the paintings, and I don't
Mm.
know. I think it's putting the cart before the horse,
Yeah. Yes.
you know, yeah.
Attention spans are so thin. and
Hmm.
where our attention goes, that's the power, that's our energy. Our energy is our attention. And it's
That's
like
great. I love
we have lost control over our own energy because of our ability to be pulled.
Yeah, so this morning I was thinking I do my paintings, the what I call the regular paintings, and then I also do a subcategory of paintings, which few people have seen because I don't really show them, which are this group of paintings that I call meditation paintings. And and I was thinking like, what's the difference between a meditation painting and a painting? And I think it has to do with the way that there's two things. One is that the meditation painting has a sustained viewership. You know, you sit down in front of it and then you have a sustained look, which is what you were talking about that we find difficulty doing. And the other thing is that you don't want the meditation painting to have a lot of storyline or characters or information. You want it to be more of a field. The field can have associations, like I'm doing one that has associations of clouds and mountains, but it's almost as if you would be sitting in a landscape meditating, those clouds and those mountains are there,
Mm.
but you are still trying to focus, and then there's a sort of a center. um and in the two meditation paintings I did earlier, they were one had to do with a kind of a rumination on being, so the word be was front and center. And then there was another painting that was a contemplation on allowing, which is something that's very difficult for like I can sort of consider myself a bootstraps person. If I want something done, I get it done. And but the biggest lesson for people like me is that we have to allow,
Mm.
right? Allow. And that's something that I'm still learning how to do. So
Hmm.
that painting had the word allow, but it wasn't like front and center. It was a hidden word.
Wow.
So it's so then there's okay, there's the field of the painting versus the image. And then there's also something that I thought, well, maybe it's that I take my ego out of the meditation paintings. And I and then I said, well, if I take the ego out of the meditation paintings, does that mean that in my painting, the ego is very present? You know? So
Mm.
I was like, I don't think that the so I was thinking about like what is the ego in my paintings? And I think that the ego in my paintings is really about recognizing that things and people have presences, and that you are met with the presence of an image. Whereas the meditation painting, you're not met with the presence of an image, you're met with the presence of a field.
Mm.
And in my paintings, I try to create presences that might reflect something more interior, like that might reflect either a concept of some kind of other bigger connection,
Mm.
or a concept of being vertical, or a concept of the circle and how we manage standing vertically to the orientation of a circle, things like
Hmm.
that.
Yeah,
Does a
yeah.
circle function as a window, those kinds of things. But their presences, their presences. And so the presences make us think of other things. They are
Hmm.
markers for bringing us to another level.
Yes.
Whereas the meditation paintings don't have those markers. The markers are more diffuse, and it's really just it's holding a space. You mentioned
Yeah.
words, and I like that concept of holding a space for
Hmm.
the viewer.
Yeah, holding a space like for them to be, to let go, to like not, because I think we're always clamoring after like knowledge and information, and that makes us feel like we're progressing. That makes us feel like we're engaging in the world. That makes us feel like we are a
Mhm.
part of the world. You know what I mean? By like always trying to like
Yeah.
grow our knowledge, grow our information, grow our intellectual prowess, so to
Right.
speak. But like, thinking about the Tao, it's like you can't have that, doesn't exist in isolation. That is just a component of a completeness. And if you don't have its counterbalancing action of being, really the non-action, right? Action versus non-action, being versus non-being. You need both. It's a whole container.
So yeah, the Tao talks about the binary oppositions of the yin and the yang, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's as a concept, it's so easy to get. It's like so simple.
Yeah.
But how well do you really understand it as something that you embrace in your life? For example, because we think of binary oppositions, we think of them like this, but
Yeah.
really it's part of one whole.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that the concept of I always thought that evil and good were sitting in two separate rooms.
Mm.
But then lately I've begun to embrace the idea that in every organism there is the evil and the good. And it's something
Mm-hmm.
that you have to kind of take into yourself. Well, I don't feel evil. I don't
Mm-hmm.
feel I have practically I could almost say no drop of evil.
Mm-hmm.
But is that really true? Is that,
Yeah.
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 And what if circumstances changed and
Mm-hmm.
sides would be brought out? So to understand that it's part of a whole means that you don't throw away one part because
Yes.
they define each other and they're always nudging each other. You know,
Mm-hmm.
do we understand sweet without salty or hot without cold?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
we can think of those things because it's very benign and they're not threatening to us. But in larger frames, we might be more threatened to think that it's so inclusive.
Yeah. No, I think for me, that's where like deep compassion actually comes from, is
Mhm,
the inner recognition of your capacity to be good or evil and to see the seeds of possibility within yourself so that you can look upon others without that, sort of like top down judgmental mind, but with this open hearted, like, wow, look at this predicament you're in. I'm in it too. We're all like in this kind of system together, and we're dealing with these aspects of our inner life, the positive and the negative. I love the symbol of the yin yang is like it's so ubiquitous. Everyone knows it. It's on skateboards. And it's become a pop cultural thing. But
mhm,
like I like to contemplate that symbol a lot, and I always look at the line, the S
mhm,
curve, the sine wave. Really, it's a sine wave
mhm, mhm,
between the opposites, and it's like that's where we exist in
mhm.
reality.
It's so
But
interesting because I just did a little it's not a painting, it's just a little thing that I hung on my wall. And it's I was noodling around with the yin yang symbol, and I was doing it in paint that was, slow to dry. And so then I made the line between the white and the black almost like invisible. There's
mm,
no line. And so it's just like contrast and then there's a and it's just
yeah, the
so that
melding.
yeah, the sine wave that you were talking about just dissolved.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And then
crazy. Yeah, the boundary, right?
right. And then I looked at it from a distance because I hung it up on my wall. I looked at it from a distance and all of a sudden it became three-dimensional.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was interesting too.
That is very interesting. It's that wave, that boundary is so rigid in that symbol. But like I love how you're talking about the blending between that transitional space to where where the awareness of one or the other dissolves into like a totality, the gray,
Mhm,
the
mhm,
gray between it. And I
mhm,
think that's kind of like life is so dynamic in that way. And I
mhm,
think about it a lot, like this idea of balance, like it's such a dynamic act. Like even if you think about it physiologically, like if I were to ask you to stand on one foot right now and you could do it super still, you're like the best yogi of all time, like you are a statue. But
Mm,
inside the muscles, there's these tiny little movements happening. There's so much dynamic energy being exchanged. There's
yeah,
so much recalibration happening every moment, but you
right.
don't see it on the surface. So it's like it's a dynamic act to be in this world and to achieve balance. And every moment is a new form of balance that has to be achieved. And I
Yes.
feel like it's a feeling, it's a state of, like we talked about earlier, of knowing, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like where you're in that state of equilibrium, which is not a static state, it's a dynamic state.
Yeah, so the thing about I think that what's so amazing about being an artist today is that while everybody is running on a treadmill, and we might also be at times, we also can um like what you and I are talking about really is has to do more with understanding where we are in the world and or the universe, and that is such a large way of framing things that but yet it's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the singular most important thing. Like, how do you frame who you are, where you are in this world at this time, um, and and sort of it ties into what is your purpose and what is the purpose,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
So, so I mean, there are many people who say, well, there isn't one purpose. Everybody should, blah blah blah. But I'm not entirely convinced that that is the case. I think that there is more of an underlying purpose
Mm-hmm.
that we can talk about. And I want to be cogent about this life that I'm living. And I want to be able to see, um, my life just as a little pin, but it's really all lives, right? It's all lives. And it's where we are in this wonderful soup of all lives, right? And and that's why you and I can have this, very interesting conversation because we are incorporating the larger questions.
Yeah.
I, I'm so bored by the questions that, um, not even questions. I'm really, I don't want to talk about the smaller things. I don't want to,
Mm-hmm.
like, in a group of people sitting at a cocktail party or some whatever, they're talking about the weather, they're talking about their kids. Like I just I don't, it's not that I don't like talking about kids or weather, but I don't, it's like right
Yeah.
now, I don't, excuse me, I don't have the time. I'm a mom at the last decades of my life, and I just don't have the time.
Yeah.
So, and it's and the amazing thing is that I feel that I've finally gotten to a point in my life where the torture factor is I have a handle on the torture factor.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't, there were some underlying things that were really causing me a lot of pain.
Mm.
And of course, we all cause our own pain.
Definitely. Mm.
And we have to just figure out a way to climb on top of it. And
Mm-hmm.
most of the time, it means that we have to take a long view
Yeah.
because the pain is coming from such a short view of
Yes.
ourselves and the
Yes.
world around us.
Mm-hmm.
The long view, everything falls into place. And that's why, for me, reading the Tao Te Ching is as meaningful as I think it is to you, because
Mm-hmm.
I have a little Tao reading group that used to meet once a month. Now, after COVID, things have broken down. We've starting over again. But no matter what is going on that day, because there might be days where, I'm having a terribly problematic day. Oh, the Tao
Mm-hmm.
group is okay. So, and I have this question like, and then by the end of the evening, it's all cleared up.
Yeah.
It's like the weather changed, the clouds have passed. I know what to do. I know how to proceed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
amazing. And it's just because we had a long view, and the Tao has a way of being big enough to incorporate the bigger view.
Yes, it does. It's so, yeah, like I have a copy of it. I'm a teacher. I teach high school art. And I have a copy of the Tao Te Ching like on my bookshelf. And like, well, sometimes students are deep in their work and they don't need me hovering over them. I got to give them the space. And
Mhm.
so I'll just walk around the room reading the Tao Te Ching
Oh,
and just
lucky student.
having like revelations, like there's so many, like you can just read one line and understand the entire book, understand the entire message through just
Yes.
one verse.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
how beautiful and how much depth and skillfulness there is in the way that those words are expressed. And
And
it
then
built, yeah.
no, there's the other. I mean, the Tao is also written in its time, and it's written to political leaders, and so
Mm-hmm.
you know, in our group we have three or four different. When we read the Tao Te Ching, we had three or four different translations, and some of them and some of them were written by Chinese, other were written by Buddhists, and other were written by American Western Buddhists.
Yeah.
And,
Mm-hmm.
and so we had all different kinds of anecdotes, and the notations were really revealing in terms of what it meant politically during the warring states when it was written. So
Mm-hmm.
that is a really helpful thing. Oh, okay. So then you don't have to rack your head against a tree to figure out what it means because it's really not written for you. It's written for another time, you know.
But at the same time, it is written for us too, right? It's like we can derive deep, profound meaning from it. And I think that's what gives it this status that it has of just transcending time and space in terms of its spiritual power. But like what
Mhm.
you're talking about is like, being able to like explore the long view, the big picture. Like that's how I've always been my whole life too. Like I can do the small talk and like I can be, in that stuff. But like as soon as I'm talking to someone and there's a little opening to go deeper, I'm like, take my hand, let's dive. Like I'm never
Do
afraid
you have
of
any?
asking those questions.
Yeah, I'm curious because I have a theory that people who are big picture thinkers, and I definitely am like you. I grew up and I still am a dyslexic. Do you have a learning disability?
I mean, I definitely had like attention issues growing up, comprehension issues a little bit, but like nothing that was like I was never medicated for it. I was never documented
No.
for it, but I
Did
definitely
you have trouble
have like
reading?
say it.
Did you have trouble reading?
I did at first a little bit. Yeah, I definitely struggled a little bit in the beginning. I remember a moment like and it was funny because I guess they given me the wrong level book and I was trying to read it and I couldn't understand it and it was actually not the right book for me. And I remember crying and being so upset, like I'm so stupid, like I'll never read it. And it turned out like the book was actually like a couple levels higher than I was ready to go to. I remember that moment vividly. It was a very hard moment for me as like a young child because I
Yeah.
felt the struggle. For me, I've always had like this kind of manic side of myself where I just get obsessed and go deep and I don't eat, I don't sleep. I can just like focus on like the
Mm,
one thing that I really care about when I can't
mm,
focus on anything else, but I can just do this one topic or this one thing. So like, but nothing like really documented, but I would definitely think self-diagnose myself as a little ADD, a little ADHD,
mm,
growing
mm,
up, but I didn't have dyslexia or
mhm,
anything like that. But I don't know.
mhm,
I've always been a rebel, I've always questioned authority. I've always felt like the authority, figures in my life, or like the authority information that's given to me in school. Like I always challenged everything. I was
mhm,
always like, I don't
mhm.
know, I was kind of
You
punk
do-
rock in that way,
you have to kind of test that information out for yourself.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
never quick to like just accept things at face value. I'd always have to
Right.
get there on my own, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm deeply interested in these bigger ideas.
Mhm.
And as a father of two young children, I find myself more getting caught up in the small view than ever before because of, you know what I mean? Because of the practicalities of raising young children and
Yeah.
making sure that they're provided for, making sure that I'm doing a good job as a father, a husband,
You have to
to make
ground it.
sure. protect and serve and care for my family. So I struggle with the small view sometimes with that, but I always,
Mm-hmm.
explode open to the larger view. And I feel like for me, what helps me remember to do that on a daily basis is having a disciplined meditative practice, where
Mm-hmm.
I, have a more formal seated practice I do every day. And then I'm always trying to integrate and reconnect with those spaces as much as I can remember. Like we were talking earlier about the phone addiction, like trying to like know when I'm way too caught up and then just smell the air and watch nature around me, or just like be a flaneur in some ways, like
Mm-hmm.
flowing through the street, observing
Or,
life.
it's like your meditative and your curiosities, your reading, your painting, and you have that life. And then you have the life that comes in from the outside in. And it's like I stepped on my glasses, so I have to have those, fixed. And then I
Mm-hmm.
have food, the refrigerator needs to be fed, and there's all kinds of things that you have to maintain. Oh, that
Mm-hmm.
green, I need more phthalo green, even something like that. Like, okay, the
Yeah.
laundry needs to be done. These things about just maintaining a life is
Yes.
it can be a real distraction, and these are a series of smalls that impinge on the bigs, and there must
Mm-hmm.
be a good reason for it. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, that's why I
with
try
all.
to look at the small and see the big inside this. You know what I mean? Because the big contains all, you know?
Mhm,
And so even
mhm,
in the small is the big. And so how do I get past my own limitations in my mind, my own judgments, my own expectations, my own, hankering desire to be somewhere other than I'm not,
mhm,
or doing something other than I'm doing, and like trying to like pierce through that to see the big inside of it. And practices like mindfulness, or contemplation, mantra, meditations, like those things are tools that I use to help me
mhm,
recalibrate when I notice I'm getting so attached and caught up in the minutia of my everyday existence.
mhm, mhm,
Divorce, I feel like in those moments divorced from the bigger picture, even though that is a total fallacy of my mind. It's an
mhm.
illusion. Like, how can you be separate from all that is and ever
Mhm.
will be? You are it.
Yeah,
But it's
yeah,
a
yeah.
practice that we have to recalibrate for.
Yeah, and I think the health of a person is the ability to move back and forth because for people who cannot take care of themselves because they have a mental illness and they are subjugated into the big picture nonstop
Mm-hmm.
24/7. That
Yes.
can be a real living hell too.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So
Yeah.
it's that balance, right? It's that balancing point. It's the union of opposites embodied within it, within every action, within every
Mhm.
thought, word, or deed. And I think for me, I'm just so young and so much to learn, and I just trying to find my own way of cultivating that type of consciousness that can be so versatile in its ability to expand and contract given on the circumstances of the moment, and being able to,
Mhm.
like we spoke about earlier, that deep state of knowing or deep state of trust, to trust your own sense of being and trust your own knowledge, trust your own experience, trust yourself to know that you know what to do. Don't
Mhm.
doubt. Like we talked about the doubting mind, which is a part of all of our experience. But the doubting mind is really a hurdle that's there to teach us lessons to how to overcome. And so every
Yeah.
time I see the doubt, I see it as an opportunity to overcome, even though I
Yeah.
fail at it a
So
lot.
I was talking about my doubt to a group of people, and someone said, it's really in that doubt, you or in that tortured state that you're in. It wasn't really about doubt, it was about that tortured state. Uh, you lack the freedom. You don't have you haven't given yourself the freedom to uh to not be in that state. Or and so like, when we are being tortured, you can have doubt without torture. But if
Mm-hmm.
you are in a tortured state, can you say like, oh, I didn't have to be chained to my studio feeling torture. I can go to the Met and look at some, Chinese landscapes, or I could
Hmm.
go to the park and watch people throw a frisbee or something like, really um oh, just like something that normally you would, you think you have to clock in 8 hours in the studio or somewhere, whatever, but you have to give yourself the freedom to not do all to not be in that pattern.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And it comes from recognition. And I
Mm,
think, for a long time in my life, and I think a lot of us can relate to it. We live on autopilot. We
right.
live on the patterns of our own conditioning that have been cultivated and handed to us through external sources of our parenting, our teachers, our community, like these ideas of who we think we are has been given to us. And I think this process of spiritual unfoldment is about letting go of what's been given to us and discovering for ourselves who it is that we actually are
Mhm,
outside of what someone has told us about ourselves through our lives, because we glom on to those ideas. I think about that really consciously as a parent, when you're speaking to your children, like you're giving them models that they're going to hold on to, and they're going to identify with those models as a sense of who they are in some way. So be very careful on the kind of models that you're going to be giving your children, because I don't
mhm,
think you can just get away with not giving them anything. You want to show them praise and congratulate them and give them love and shine light on them when they're doing something spectacular, or they discover something new, or they have a new skill, or they have a new insight, or you just see something that they're doing exceptionally well.
mhm,
But at the same time, like you're going to be kind of like almost burdening them with
mhm,
something that they're going to have to dismantle one day as
mhm,
well.
mhm,
Does that make sense to you, like in your life, like the idea of like how we are given these ideas of who we are, and this process of expanding your consciousness and getting connected to the bigger picture is about dismantling those things in some
mhm.
ways.
Oh, absolutely. That goes back to the stereotypes too, right?
Mm-hmm.
The woulda, coulda, shoulda. And I think that everybody struggles from woulda, coulda, shoulda. And I don't know how some people can shake it earlier than other people. It's really amazing. Whether it's they're brought up with such a solid sense of self, or I mean, who knows what it is, right? There's so many
Yeah.
things. We come into this world and it's people talk about nature or nurture. There's a lot more to it than just nature or nurture. You
Mm-hmm.
and it could go into the time before you were born. Now they're discovering that we can be carrying the trauma of 200 years ago if
Yeah.
our parent was a slave or something like that,
Yes. And
or grandparent.
epigenetics, right? Like our
um
DNA holds those memories.
right. And then even going beyond that, what about if you believe in a past life, then what about, and maybe you had maybe you're 600 lives, and then but maybe in one of those lives you were fed to the lions or something. That
Mm-hmm.
might be a trauma that you have in the back of when you see a cat. Oh, I'm allergic to cats. No, you're not allergic to cats. You just really, maybe you were eaten by a cat. So I
Yes.
mean, I'm just throwing out an absurd example, but we have no idea what really informs us. We think we do, and we make up
Yeah.
stories we do. And those stories can serve us very well because they give us confidence,
Mm-hmm.
they give us confidence that we have a handle on what it is we're actually doing.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I love that you're open to those ideas. Like it's because I am too, like the idea of past lives, reincarnation has always been something I've thought about since I was 9 years old. I had
Mm,
like a crazy insight about reincarnation when I was really young, before I even came across Buddhism or any Eastern philosophy. And that's always been sort of like I don't know. For me, at that point in my life, it like liberated me in some ways. I had this like really debilitating fear of like chemicals and all things toxic. Like kids were sniffing Sharpies and Windex, and I was like, "Oh, these things are toxic. They're all gonna kill me." whatever. And I remember like one day, like I was so sick of feeling that way, like being in art class. I always was very drawn to my art, and the kids are all like sniffing the Sharpies and stuff. And I was like scared to do it. And I was like, and I remember going
Mm,
home and just laying down in my room and being like, why am I so scared of these things? Like,
mm,
what is death? What is going on here? And I just had this like I call that like my first spiritual insight or my first
mm,
meditative experience. And I just came to the conclusion myself, like, duh, when you die, you're just going to be born again as something else, just like the spring always comes after winter. It's like there's a cycle. And,
mhm,
and honestly, when that thought hit my mind, those fears just dissolved
mhm.
completely. And
Well,
I didn't
now we
have that again. It was weird. It was pretty cool.
that's amazing story. It's so profound, but it's um now we live in a great time because now we have these all these this information about near-death experiences
Mm-hmm.
and uh, so I mean I don't think it's an accident that everybody who has a near-death experience says the same things and
Yeah.
can tell you what was said between two people in another room. These
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
No, it's super fascinating. And there's like a scientist at, I think someone doing research at University of Virginia or one of those, doing, or no, he's doing the past life, the reincarnation one. There's someone who's documenting like kids who recall their past lives and doing this incredible documentation on these kids remembering like things that they could never ever know, yet
Yes.
he would do the research and find the people or find the stories and corroborate the stories that these children have. And so anything is, for me, like I'm just like so open to all these possibilities. Like at the end of the day, I know I can't fully know until, you know what I mean, those moments, the
Yeah.
moment of death is like the ultimate. We all
Yeah.
have to walk through that door.
I think I'm torturing my granddaughter who's 2.5 years old, because I'll say things like, well, what was it like when before you were born? Where were you? And then
Yeah.
and she'll stop for a second and then she'll say, oh, let's go play Frozen or something.
Well, they
Frozen.
will. The kids are incredible. I mean, I'm not going to go into this whole story because it's very personal, but my son was saying some things and doing things that are mind blowing when he was about 3 or 4 years old that
Okay.
I'm documenting and gonna like revisit,
Good. Good. Good.
like just some of the things that he's said and known. Like I just have no idea how he says or knows these things. So I'm documenting. I don't want to get into it here just
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah. We'll do it
very
another time.
another time, but it's
Yeah.
it's it's so fascinating. And then so like I want to circle back to like the catalyst of all these things. Like we're talking about like what helps us open to the big picture when a lot of us are
Mhm,
living like kind of that rat race, like attached to like the methods and modes of our current cultural paradigm, where we're
mhm,
thinking about the small self, the small life, the small it, all the time, every day. But then people have
mhm,
these openings. Some are just come into the world, already like
mhm,
open and to these things. Some have experiences that open them to them. And for me, it was like a combination. Like I think suffering, I think about the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism, like suffering is such an important catalyst for awakening for
mhm,
anybody. If you have
mhm,
the, I don't know, I guess the grace, the blessings, the support to see that, because I
mhm,
think suffering can send us in two directions, this direction of like full awakening and really blossoming that curiosity about the bigger picture again, or it can
mhm,
retreat us into deeper and deeper fear and
mhm,
anxiety. But for me, like suffering was always grace in my
mhm,
life.
mhm.
And I feel like really
It's
blessed to
part of,
say that.
yeah, suffering is one step in a wheel. And
Mm-hmm.
as the wheel turns, you go into suffering, but you come out of suffering. And what happens when you come out of suffering? It's sort of like having the flu. Like I just got over the flu a few days ago.
Oh
And,
man.
when I was in the flu, like nothing was important. I just had to sleep. I slept during the day, I slept during the night. And then gradually I could feel myself coming back to me. And I was like, what is this self that comes back? What is it? And it was part of my mind coming back to me, the activeness of my mind. And then it was my appetite. And it's just like, what is the thing that makes you a living being
Hmm.
when you are debilitated by something? You are less of that being, you know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's something very important to pay attention to, right? Because that's the difference between life and less life, or life and no life, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Or
Definitely.
vitality and less vitality.
Yes, exactly. And I feel like the feeling of full vitality is that feeling of wonder and curiosity and openness and appreciation, deep, deep appreciation for
Mm,
the miracle and majesty of this life. And
hmm
the world can be so
hmm
numbing to the sense
hmm
of that. And I think I feel grateful. I'm sure you share in this gratitude that be living the life of a creative, of an artist, is always going to get you into it's going to confront you with an opportunity to open again and to feel that
hmm
wonder and curiosity again. If you're doing it right, you know what I mean? You're always going to
hmm
be presented with like an out, because of that energy, that creative drive inside of you, that is all based on wonder and curiosity in my mind. So it's like really being in touch with that and really being willing to like let go of the attachments that you have to